Hey folks, welcome to Deep Dive Dispatch, the podcast where we don't just scratch the surface. We dig deep into the political landscapes that shape our world today. I'm excited to introduce your guides on this journey through history and headlines, John Matthews and his insightful co-host, Sarah Collins. Together, they'll peel back the layers of complex political issues, offering a slightly conservative viewpoint while staying rooted in facts and historical context. So, buckle up for a thought-provoking ride as we dive into the stories behind the stories. This is Deep Dive Dispatch. Let's get started.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be going deep into something that affects us all, pharmaceuticals and national security. So buckle up. We're about to explore how America's reliance on foreign countries for all those pills and medications we take could actually be a national security risk, especially in times of crisis.
Yeah, it's interesting how this issue often kind of flies under the radar. We just take it for granted that our medications will always be there. But what happens if that's not the case?
Right. And to get to the bottom of this,
Yeah.
we're going to be looking at all sorts of stuff, government reports, policy statements, even Trump's Agenda 47, to really understand how our medicine cabinets are tied to national security.
We're going to untangle this complex web and connect the dots between geopolitics, global trade, and your health.
It's a deep dive, all right.
Yes.
So, you ready to get started?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's set the scene first. Paint a picture of the global pharmaceutical landscape. Did you know that a crazy 80% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs for short, the stuff that actually makes our medicines work, are sourced from abroad?
80%, that's a huge chunk.
It is. And to make things even more interesting.
Most of that production is concentrated in just two countries, China and India.
Wow. So those everyday medications we rely on, like antibiotics, pain relievers, even essential stuff like thyroid hormones, many of them rely on ingredients from those two countries.
It's true.
Okay, so that's where they come from. But how do we get to this point? It wasn't always like this was it.
You're right. It's been a gradual shift. Globalization has played a huge role. Companies looking for cheaper production costs and less stringent regulations move production overseas. Makes sense from a purely economic perspective.
Cheaper meds. Who wouldn't want that?
Exactly. But as we've seen in recent years, this reliance comes with some pretty big risks.
Like what?
Well, remember those shortages we've been seeing? Antibiotics, over-the-counter pain relievers, even basic medications, all because of disruptions in the supply chain.
Yeah, it's unsettling to think that just getting your prescription filled could become a challenge.
And it's not just an inconvenience. We're talking about a potential national security threat here.
Oh, wow. How so?
Well, think about it this way. Rosemary Gibson, she testified before Congress back in 2019, and she said something that really stuck with me. She said, quote, "Medicines can be used as a weapon of war against the United States," end quote.
Whoa. That's pretty intense.
It is, but it highlights a real vulnerability.
Okay, so are we really that vulnerable? Could another country actually use our need for medicine against us?
Imagine a scenario. We're in a conflict with a country that supplies a lot of our essential medications, and they decide to cut us off.
Yikes.
That could cripple our healthcare system, hurt the economy, even impact military readiness.
And it wouldn't even have to be a full-blown war.
Right, even disruptions from natural disasters or trade disputes could have serious consequences.
So it sounds like we're walking a tightrope here. Relying on others for something as crucial as medicine makes us vulnerable in a lot of ways.
Exactly.
So what can we do about it? This is where Trump's America First agenda comes in, right?
Yes. Under the banner of America First, Trump pushed initiatives like Agenda 47 and Executive Order 13944, which were all about bringing pharmaceutical production back to the U.S.
So they basically said, let's make our own meds.
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that. But essentially, yes, they wanted to reduce our dependence on foreign countries and boost domestic production.
Okay. How did they go about doing that?
The FDA played a big role. They identified 223 essential medicines and 96 medical countermeasures that are considered absolutely crucial for national security.
223 essential medicines.
These included things like ventilators, diagnostic testing supplies, even personal protective equipment, or PPE.
Ah, PPE. We all remember how important that was during the pandemic.
Exactly. It highlighted how critical it is to have a reliable supply of these essential items.
Okay, so it seems like they were trying to anticipate potential problems and make sure we had what we needed. But did it work?
That's a great question, and it's one that experts are still debating. Some argue that these initiatives didn't go far enough. Others say that bringing all pharmaceutical production back to the U.S. might not be the best solution either.
Okay, so mixed opinions on whether Trump's approach was the right one.
Exactly.
Well, before we jump into solutions.
It's important to understand the nuances of the problem. It's not as simple as just saying, we make all our meds here, or we get all our meds from over there.
Right. There's got to be more to it.
There is. For example, while China is a major player in producing the active ingredients, the APIs,
Yeah.
the U.S. is still strong in producing finished, branded medications.
Interesting.
So it's not a black and white situation.
Got it. It's more complex than that.
Much more. And there are other factors to consider, too, like the fact that a lot of the antibiotics we import aren't even for humans.
What?
Yeah. A big chunk of those imported antibiotics are actually used for livestock.
Huh. I never would have guessed that.
See? There's always more to learn.
I'm starting to feel like we're peeling back the layers of an onion here. The more we dig, the more intricate it gets.
I agree. And understanding these complexities is key to finding real solutions.
Solutions that can create a more secure and resilient pharmaceutical supply chain for the U.S.
Exactly.
All right. So we've set the scene. We've talked about the potential dangers of relying on other countries for our medications. And we've touched upon Trump's America First agenda and the debate surrounding it. Next time, we'll take a closer look at the arguments for and against bringing pharmaceutical production back to the U.S. and explore other potential solutions to this complex challenge. So stay tuned.
Hey everyone, just taking a moment to send a huge shout out to all of you tuning in to Deep Dive Dispatch. Your support really keeps us going. And if you're enjoying the deep dives and want to help us continue bringing you these thought-provoking discussions, head over to deepdivedispatch.com. It's an awesome way to support the show and keep the conversation alive. Big thanks for being part of our community. Now, let's jump back into the next part of our episode and keep unraveling these intriguing topics. Enjoy.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive, folks. We've been talking about this whole issue of pharmaceuticals and national security and how reliant America is on foreign countries for essential medications. Now, I think a really good case study that kind of brings this whole problem into focus is the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic.
Oh, absolutely. The pandemic, it was like a stress test for the entire global system, and it really exposed some major weaknesses in the pharmaceutical supply chain.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think back on it now, but back then, it felt like the world was turned upside down.
For sure. Suddenly, everyone needed masks, ventilators, basic medications, and the demand just overwhelmed the supply.
Yeah, I remember those images of healthcare workers wearing garbage bags because they didn't have enough PPE.
It was a wake-up call for a lot of people. It showed just how vulnerable we are when we rely on other countries for critical medical supplies.
And it wasn't just about the shortages either, right?
Yeah.
There were also reports of counterfeit masks and faulty ventilators flooding the market.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That added a whole other layer of complexity and danger to the situation.
It was chaos.
Yeah.
And while we did eventually ramp up domestic production, those early days of the pandemic really highlighted a critical vulnerability in our national security.
It was a stark reminder that our health and security are intertwined with this complex global network of pharmaceutical production and distribution.
And you know, it's funny because we talked earlier about that quote from Rosemary Gibson.
Oh, yeah.
About how medicines could be used as a weapon of war against the U.S.
Right.
And while the pandemic wasn't an intentional act of aggression,
Of course.
it did show us how disruptions to the pharmaceutical supply chain,
Whether intentional or not.
can have a devastating impact.
Absolutely. It highlighted that this is not just some theoretical threat. This is something that can have real-world consequences.
So the pandemic was a pretty harsh lesson learned.
Yeah.
So let's circle back to the Trump administration's America First agenda. What steps did they take to address this issue?
Well, they recognized this as a major national security threat, and they took action to reduce our reliance on foreign drug production.
So how do they do that?
One of their key moves was Executive Order 13944, which directed the FDA to identify those essential medicines that we absolutely can't do without.
So they basically said, we need to make sure that no matter what happens in the world, Americans will have access to these critical medications.
Exactly. It was about ensuring our health security, even in the face of global uncertainty.
Makes sense. But it wasn't just about identifying these medicines, right?
No. They also wanted to encourage companies to bring production back to the U.S.
Okay. So how did they plan to do that?
Yep.
Convince all these companies to pack up and move their operations?
Well, it wasn't that simple. It was more about creating the right conditions to make domestic production more attractive.
Like what?
They offered incentives, cut regulations, and made strategic investments, all with the goal of making the U.S. a more competitive place to manufacture drugs.
Give me some specifics.
Sure. One example is the establishment of opportunity zones. These were economically distressed areas where investors could get big tax breaks for putting money into businesses, including pharmaceutical manufacturing.
So it was like a carrot and stick approach.
You could say that.
Yeah.
They were trying to incentivize companies to do what they wanted.
Interesting.
And they also argued that cutting regulations would make it easier and cheaper for businesses to operate in the U.S.
Less red tape. More freedom for companies.
That was the idea.
So did it work?
Well, there were definitely some notable wins. A number of pharmaceutical companies did announce plans to open new manufacturing facilities in the U.S.
So the America First agenda did have some impact, but did it completely solve the problem?
Well, that's a tough question, and it's one that experts are still debating.
Okay.
Some argue that while these were good steps, they weren't enough to truly reshore pharmaceutical production.
Right.
And that we still remain vulnerable to disruptions in the global supply chain.
So more work to be done.
It seems that way.
All right. So we've talked about the Trump administration's efforts, but are there downsides to this reshoring approach? And what other solutions might be out there?
Those are great questions, and we're going to dig into them in the next part of our deep dive.
So stay with us.
Hey everyone, just taking a moment to send a huge shout out to all of you tuning in to Deep Dive Dispatch. Your support really keeps us going. And if you're enjoying the deep dives and want to help us continue bringing you these thought-provoking discussions, head over to deepdivedispatch.com. It's an awesome way to support the show and keep the conversation alive. Big thanks for being part of our community. Now, let's jump back into the next part of our episode and keep unraveling these intriguing topics. Enjoy.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into pharmaceuticals and national security. We've been exploring this intricate world of where our medicines come from.
And how that reliance on foreign sources could pose some real risks.
Right, and we've also talked about the Trump administration's push to boost domestic production.
But it's clear there's no easy fix.
No magic bullet.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? What can we actually do to build a more secure and resilient pharmaceutical supply chain?
Well, it's going to take a multi-pronged approach, a combination of government action, industry innovation, and, as we've been emphasizing, individual engagement.
Let's break that down, starting with the government. What specific actions can they take?
Well, one crucial area is the Strategic National Stockpile, the SNS.
Oh, right. That's our national reserve of essential medicines and medical supplies. Kind of like a giant emergency kit for the whole country.
Exactly. And we need to make sure it's well-stocked, well-managed, and ready to go when disaster strikes.
So more funding, better organization,
Yeah.
and a system to get the supplies where they're needed quickly.
All of that. The National Biodefense Science Board, they put out a report in 2020, and they had some really good recommendations. Well, for one, they said we need multi-year budgeting for the SNS, so we're not scrambling for funds every time there's a crisis.
Makes sense. Planning ahead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They also highlighted the importance of strong partnerships between federal, state, and local agencies.
So everyone's on the same page when it comes to distributing those supplies.
Exactly. Coordination is key.
Okay. So a well-funded, well-organized SNS. What about the FDA? What role do they play in all this?
The FDA's got a huge responsibility. They're the ones who make sure our medicines are safe and effective, no matter where they're made.
Right.
So they need to have the resources to do their job properly, which means conducting thorough inspections of overseas manufacturing facilities.
Making sure those companies are playing by the rules.
Exactly. And holding them accountable when they're not.
Like in that case with Intis Pharmaceuticals in India.
Oh, yeah. That was a pretty big deal.
Shredding documents. Trying to cover up problems.
Not good.
Not good at all.
But it shows why those FDA inspections are so important.
Makes you wonder what else might be slipping through the cracks.
Yeah, it's definitely a concern. And beyond inspections, the FDA also needs to be working with industry to encourage innovation.
Innovation in drug manufacturing.
Yep. We need to find new ways to make domestic production more efficient and cost-effective.
So it's not just about bringing those jobs back.
It's about creating an environment where American companies can compete and thrive.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's the government's role. What about industry itself? What can pharmaceutical companies do to strengthen the supply chain?
There's a lot they can do. For one, they can embrace advanced manufacturing techniques.
What does that mean?
Things like automation, continuous manufacturing,
Yeah.
even 3D printing of medications.
Oh, 3D printed pills. That sounds like something out of Star Trek.
It does. But it's becoming more and more of a reality, and it could really change the game.
How so?
Well, imagine being able to manufacture drugs on demand, right where they're needed.
Wow. That would cut down on transportation costs.
And reduce our reliance on those long, vulnerable global supply chains.
Pretty amazing. What else can companies do?
They can diversify their sourcing of raw materials. Instead of relying so heavily on one or two countries, they can spread the risk by working with multiple suppliers in different regions.
So don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly.
Right.
And finally, industry needs to step up and educate the public about these issues.
Really?
They need to be transparent about their manufacturing practices, explain why domestic production is important, and help people understand the risks of relying solely on foreign sources.
So it's about transparency.
Yes, and empowering consumers to make informed choices.
I like that. Okay, so we've talked about government action, industry innovation. What about us? What can regular folks do to make a difference?
Well, first and foremost, stay informed.
Do your research.
Exactly. Read up on these issues and talk to your healthcare providers about the availability of domestically produced medications.
You might be surprised at what options are out there.
You might, and don't be afraid to advocate for change.
Write to your elected officials. Support policies that promote domestic production.
Make your voice heard.
And when you're at the pharmacy, try to choose American-made products whenever possible.
It all adds up.
Every little bit helps.
And remember, this conversation doesn't end here.
This is just the beginning.
The pharmaceutical supply chain is constantly evolving, so we need to stay engaged, stay informed, and keep pushing for a system that prioritizes the health and security of all Americans.
Well said. This deep dive has been a real eye-opener.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
We've uncovered some challenges,
For sure.
but also some really exciting possibilities.
Absolutely.
And most importantly, we've seen how even small actions can contribute to a more secure and resilient future for all of us.
It's all about collective effort.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dives, everyone. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
And remember, knowledge is power.
Hey folks, thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive Dispatch. We hope you found today's episode enlightening and packed full of insight. Remember, your support keeps us diving deep into the stories that matter. So if you enjoyed the show, make sure to download and share it with others who crave a deeper understanding of politics and history. And don't forget, we want to hear from you. If there's a topic out there that you think deserves a deep dive, reach out and let us know. Your input helps us bring you the most compelling content week after week. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll catch you next time on Deep Dive Dispatch. Keep exploring, folks.